We investigated 10 hi-fi amplifiers, and only 3 surprised us. Over the past few months, I've spent a lot of time revisiting 10 of the most talked about hi-fi amplifiers on the market. Some were incredibly expensive. Some had earned almost universal praise. And a few had already achieved legendary status among audiophiles. I expected to come away with a clear favorite. Instead, I left with something much more interesting. The real surprise wasn't discovering which amplifier sounded the best. It was realizing that only 3 genuinely changed the way I thought about modern hi-fi. Not because they were the most expensive, not because they were packed with the newest technology. They surprised me because they challenged assumptions I didn't even realize I still had. So this isn't another list ranking 10 amplifiers from worst to best. It's the story of 7 amplifiers that confirmed what I already believed and 3 that quietly convinced me to rethink it. 7 amplifiers that did exactly what we expected. Let's start with the 7 amplifiers that lived up to every expectation. The McIntosh MA352 was every bit as rich, refined, and unmistakably McIntosh as its reputation promised. The Luxman L-509Z delivered the graceful, musical presentation that has kept Luxman owners loyal for decades. The Hegel H390 remained calm, powerful, and effortlessly controlled, exactly as so many long-term owners describe it. The Yamaha A-S3200 combined outstanding craftsmanship with the classic engineering discipline that has become Yamaha's signature. The NAME SuperNate 3 brought its familiar sense of rhythm and involvement, encouraging you to focus on the performance rather than the equipment. The Rotel Michi X3 proved once again that exceptional build quality and serious engineering don't always require the prestige of a century-old brand. And the Marantz Model 30 reminded me why so many listeners describe it as inviting, relaxed, and consistently enjoyable over long listening sessions. Every one of these amplifiers deserved its reputation. Every one of them would make a wonderful long-term companion in the right system, but none of them fundamentally changed my expectations. They simply confirmed them. Sometimes that's exactly what great engineering is supposed to do. Predictability isn't a weakness when excellence has become the standard, but the next 3 amplifiers did something entirely different. Instead of confirming what I already believed, they made me question it. Surprise number 1, NAD M33, the one that cost far less than it should. The first amplifier that genuinely surprised me wasn't the most expensive on the list. It wasn't the most luxurious either. In fact, that's precisely why the NAD M33 stood out. For decades, NAD has built its reputation less on prestige and more on intelligent engineering. The company has rarely chased the kind of visual drama that dominates high-end audio showrooms. Instead, it is consistently focused on solving practical problems for music lovers. The M33 continues that philosophy almost perfectly. On paper, it's easy to notice the headlines. Pio-Warphy Eigentakt amplification, integrated Blue OS streaming, modern digital connectivity, a clean, understated industrial design. But specifications alone don't explain why this amplifier surprised me. What surprised me was the experience of living with the idea behind it. NAD never tried to convince people that luxury required oversized chassis, glowing meters, or thick slabs of machined aluminum. The M33 feels almost refreshingly confident. It doesn't demand admiration. It simply gets on with the job. Over time, I've noticed an interesting pattern among M33 owners. Many don't describe it as the best amplifier they've ever heard. Instead, they describe something much more revealing. They stop thinking about upgrading. That's a very different compliment. Once the amplifier is in place, attention gradually shifts away from equipment and back toward music. Streaming becomes effortless. System integration becomes simpler. Daily listening becomes more frequent. And somehow, the amplifier itself fades into the background. Listening through the M33, everything feels composed, balanced, modern, clean. It doesn't exaggerate. It doesn't constantly try to impress. Instead, it creates the kind of quiet confidence that becomes more valuable the longer you own it. Is it perfect? Of course not. Every amplifier involves compromises. But the M33 forced me to rethink the distance between what many people call mid-fi and what others insist is high-end. That gap suddenly felt much smaller than I had imagined. Surprise number 2, Accuphase E5000, the one engineers quietly respect. Some amplifiers impress you the moment you turn them on. The Accuphase E5000 isn't really one of them. Its greatest strength reveals itself much more slowly. And I think that's exactly why so many experienced listeners end up respecting it. Accuphase has never seemed interested in dominating conversations. The company rarely relies on bold marketing claims or dramatic redesigns. Instead, it has spent decades following a distinctly Japanese philosophy of continuous refinement. Each generation improves carefully. Nothing changes simply for the sake of looking new. That discipline is visible throughout the E5000. The construction feels deliberate. The controls move with reassuring precision. Every element gives the impression that consistency mattered more than spectacle. It's the kind of amplifier that doesn't ask for attention. It quietly earns it. That same philosophy is reflected in the people who buy it. One pattern appears again and again among Accuphase owners. They rarely leave the brand. Instead, they move upward within it. An owner who begins with an E280 may eventually buy an E4000. An E4000 owner may later choose an E5000, and years later, perhaps a separate pre-power combination. The amplifier changes. The philosophy remains exactly the same. That's a remarkably unusual level of loyalty in an industry built around constant comparison. Listening to the E5000 helps explain why. Nothing immediately demands your attention. It doesn't exaggerate detail. It doesn't try to sound larger than life. It doesn't overwhelm you with a dramatic first impression. Instead, the presentation feels composed, honest, controlled. The longer you listen, the more natural everything begins to feel. Hours pass without fatigue. Different recordings maintain their individual character. The amplifier seems less interested in showing what it can do than in letting the music speak for itself. At first, that restraint can almost seem understated. Later, it becomes one of its greatest strengths. And that's where my biggest surprise came. It wasn't the sound itself. Excellent sound is something you expect from an amplifier in this class. The real surprise was understanding why Accuphase owners almost never seem to abandon the brand. The amplifier doesn't constantly encourage the next upgrade. It quietly removes the desire for one. That may be one of the hardest things any piece of hi-fi equipment can achieve. Surprise. Number 3, WiiM Amp Pro, the amplifier that changed my definition of value. This is probably the most controversial amplifier on the entire list. Not because it's the most expensive, quite the opposite. Many audiophiles wouldn't even have considered putting a WiiM Amp Pro in the same conversation as amplifiers costing several $1,000s. A few years ago, neither would I. But that's exactly why it became the biggest surprise. WiiM approached hi-fi from a completely different direction. Rather than asking how to build another impressive amplifier, the company asked a much simpler question. How much complexity can we remove without taking away the joy of listening? The result is a compact amplifier that combines modern streaming, efficient Class D amplification, room-friendly design, and everyday convenience inside a single enclosure. No rack full of components, no separate streamer, no maze of cables. Just one box that encourages people to start listening within minutes. That simplicity has attracted a surprisingly broad group of owners. Some are buying their very first hi-fi system. Others are experienced audiophiles looking for a second setup. Many simply want a system that fits naturally into daily life without sacrificing sound quality. What's remarkable is how often those different groups arrive at the same conclusion. They listen more, not because the WiiM Amp Pro delivers the most spectacular sound they've ever heard. There are amplifiers with greater refinement, more authority, more scale. That's not the point. Its achievement lies somewhere else. Listening feels effortless. Streaming is reliable. The user experience disappears into the background. Instead of planning the next upgrade, owners often find themselves planning the next album. That shift is surprisingly important because the best value in hi-fi isn't always measured by absolute performance. Sometimes it's measured by how effectively a product removes barriers between you and your music. The WiiM Amp Pro forced me to reconsider what value actually means. For decades, value usually meant getting slightly better sound for slightly less money. Today, perhaps it means something different. Perhaps value means creating a system so simple, so capable, and so enjoyable that the desire to keep chasing equipment begins to fade. That raises an uncomfortable question for the rest of the industry. If one affordable amplifier can satisfy so many listeners with a single compact box, how many separate boxes will tomorrow's hi-fi systems really need? What actually surprised us, that is. None of them tried to impress through spectacle. None relied on oversized chassis, extravagant styling, or dramatic demonstrations designed to create an instant wow moment. Instead, each solved a different problem that many audiophiles quietly struggle with. The NAD M33 made high-end performance feel far more accessible than I expected. The AccuPhase E5000 made owners stop thinking about replacing their amplifier altogether. And the WiiM Amp Pro proved that simplicity can sometimes be a greater luxury than complexity. That's the twist I never saw coming. The amplifiers that stayed with me weren't necessarily the ones with the most impressive specifications. They were the ones that changed the way people actually lived with their systems. In the end, that's a far more meaningful achievement. Because great engineering isn't just about producing better measurements. It's about making people spend less time thinking about their equipment and more time listening to music. The best amplifier doesn't always impress first. After years of watching amplifiers get bought, sold, serviced, and passed from one owner to another, I've come to appreciate something that isn't obvious during a quick demonstration. Some amplifiers impress you on the very first listen. Others reveal their value only after years of ownership. Those aren't always the same amplifier. And perhaps that's one of the most fascinating things about hi-fi. The equipment we remember isn't always the one that sounded the most spectacular for 15 minutes. More often, it's the one that quietly became part of our daily lives, the one that made us stop thinking about upgrades, the one that kept us reaching for another album instead of another piece of equipment. That's exactly what the three biggest surprises in this video had in common. If you enjoyed this investigation, please leave a like. It really helps more people discover the channel and subscribe to Vintage Resonance. Thank you for watching. Until next time, keep listening and keep asking what really makes great hi-fi last.